Good morning. It's Sunday, April 12th. Thanks for joining us for News 8 this week. This morning, our program will focus mostly on our exclusive interview with the U.S. Attorney for Iowa's Southern District. David Waterman is the top federal prosecutor for 47 counties in Iowa, including Scott County. Waterman took the reins in October of last year. These are photos from his swearing in. Our interview with him covers a bit of his background, his priorities for his office, and how those compare to the priorities of the DOJ. We talked about issues facing our communities, including immigration, human trafficking, and fraud. And joining us now is David Waterman. David, thanks so much for coming in. Really excited to have you. And I know we were just talking about you're excited to be here as well.
I am. Thank you, John. And thank you for the opportunity. The press plays a vital role in ensuring and furthering our mission at the Department of Justice. So I'm grateful to be here. As we were discussing before this started, you know, it's important for transparency purposes. We want the public to be educated about our criminal justice system, but also it's in furtherance of the philosophical justifications of punishment. And what do I mean by that? I mean deterrence, not only specific deterrence, that is the individual who committed a crime, but also general deterrence, so that the population knows these types of crimes, these types of law violations are being investigated, so they know not to commit them. And finally, we want to also support and ensure that victims and witnesses feel safe coming forward if they want to discuss certain crimes that they believe have been committed to their local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies.
Okay, I think we're going to get into a lot of those little issues there
Perfect.
that you just brought up here.
Good.
But let me start a little bit just kind of background-wise so people know who you are. I think there's a lot of people in our community who know the name,
Yeah, thanks.
right?
Yeah.
Which is great. But give me a sense of your background, an understanding of your background, but I'm very curious about that background in almost a historical context, because as I was doing my research, I'm like, oh my goodness. It's incredible, just the names that have, you know, been a part of this community for so many years.
Well, thank you, and I'm grateful for that history. It's my great-great-grandfather was on Iowa Supreme Court from 1898 to 1902. Following that, he returned to the Quad Cities, practiced in Davenport with Joe R. Lane, who was a congressman, one-term congressman. It was interesting. I learned this later after expressing an interest and wanting to become U.S. Attorney, but Joe R. Lane's father, James T. Lane, was one of the early U.S. attorneys. He was actually appointed by Ulysses S. Grant, who was the 18th United States president.
That was incredible when I read that.
In 1873, right?
Yeah.
And he was the last United States attorney to serve for the entire state of Iowa until it was divided into two districts. So I represent the Southern District of Iowa, approximately 1.8 million Iowans. We have about 27 AUSAs and about 50 support staff and AUSAs combined.
Your experience in the various roles that you've had in the public sector, the private sector, how are they coming together now in this role?
No, it's a great question. And I think because of that unique experience, I think I'm in a great position to have a balanced, diverse perspective when looking at issues and hopefully enforcing the law. I mean, my key job in this role is not political. I'm not a politician. I'm an attorney attempting to enforce the law and ensuring that we get to just outcomes by applying the facts and the law and not worrying about fear or favor or political issues that can arise. So I think having this unique perspective of representing defendants in the criminal and civil arena, but also victims, and then being a federal prosecutor previously as well as a federal law clerk. I clerked for two different district court judges in the Southern and the Northern District of Iowa, and then on the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals before becoming an AUSA in the Middle District, and then coming back to Lane and Waterman and being a private practitioner here.
Because of your connections with a private law firm, a Iowa justice, Supreme Court justice, do you anticipate any challenges in your role when it comes to sort of all those parties kind of coming together if they happen to be?
You know, but another great question. If there is ever a conflict of interest that arises, my uncle, Justice Tom Waterman, will recuse himself from those matters if it involves Lane and Waterman or if it involves the United States Attorney's Office. Fortunately, my close mentor, Jeff Lang, is retired, is of counsel. Lane and Waterman isn't as involved as he was previously, so we don't have as many conflicts in the Southern District of Iowa. But I was grateful to have an opportunity to learn from him. He started the white-collar government compliance practice at Lane and Waterman and was the former United States Attorney for the Central District of Illinois.
Let's talk priorities.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm curious about what your priorities are and how many priorities do you have that are yours that you get to sort of decide on, and how many come from the administration and other parts of the department?
Well, and that's, you bring up an excellent point, which is our priorities are driven by two factors. First, it's the Department of Justice. What are the priorities that we're receiving, the policies from Maine Justice? But then also, what are we seeing on the ground? What is it that we need to be doing locally to impact community safety and to protect our citizenry? I would focus on three things in particular, and I have the stats here in my pocket if we want to get into them in depth, but I know off the top of my head, last year, so from January of 2025 to January of 2026, we charged 107 narcotics cases. We charged 75 violent crime and gang cases, and we charged 47 child pornography, child exploitation cases. And I think it's worth noting, and I think the public should be informed about this, that we have been successful and have been rated highly when you consider the districts across the country. There's 94 federal districts, 93 U.S. attorneys' offices, because one covers both Guam and the Mariana Islands. But when it comes to the statistics, we have been second for prosecution of overdose cases, and that's specifically fentanyl, which is, as the current administration has categorized it, a weapon of mass destruction. We had 53 cases that we charged. This was according to the 2025 U.S. Sentencing Commission report. Two cases in particular that I'd note would be Andrews and Warren Narani. Those were recent successful prosecutions that we had. Warren Narani had been distributing approximately 60,000 fentanyl pills into the Southern District of Iowa, resulting in overdose deaths. Same with Andrews. She was sentenced to 196 months imprisonment, found slumped over her steering wheel car with a distribution quantity of fentanyl within inside of her vehicle. I also would highlight two other areas where we've been very successful, and that would be human trafficking, which includes, and this is an uncomfortable area to talk about, but it's important that the public knows that we're investing in protecting the citizenry in this area. Child exploitation, adult sexual exploitation, which includes by fraud and coercion, and also labor trafficking. So when you consider human trafficking, we've been in the top 5 for the last 5 years, and that looks at all the way back to 2021 federal human trafficking statistics. And I would bring to your attention in particular the Markley decision, which was a decision by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals this week affirming his life sentence for 15 counts of sex trafficking. And this involved an individual who was an Ames nurse and business practitioner who was abusing children in Ames and then surreptitiously recording them, saying that it was in furtherance of medical research, but it wasn't. He was sentenced to life term. And then another case, one of the most egregious facts I've come across as a federal prosecutor, again, I was an AUSA in both the appellate and the violent crimes divisions in the Middle District of Florida, which is the second largest district in the country with 11.5 million Floridians. But I had never come across these facts. It involved a defendant in Davenport who was fostering and adopting children and then had reached out to pedophiles around the Midwest and other sex offenders and solicited them to come to his home and abuse these children and then record it. He was sentenced to 100 years in prison, another success of our office. And finally, violent crime is another area that we continue to focus our resources on because of the impact that it has on community safety. Two gangs in particular have been very difficult to deal with in the Southern District. OMB gang in Des Moines, as well as the 5th Street gang here in Davenport. And last year we had 3 different jury trials. All 14 defendants were found guilty of RICO, conspiracy crimes, drug trafficking crimes, and firearm-related offenses. And then 17 defendants were also found guilty in Des Moines related to the OMB gang. And both of these gangs were involved in attempted murders. They had shot at law enforcement vehicles. And what's notable is the empirical evidence establishes that after these prosecutions took place, there was a significant decrease in the crimes that were happening and the violence that were happening in the Quad Cities as well as Des Moines.
We'll continue our conversation with David Waterman. In about 6 minutes, we'll talk about the crimes that are part of a broader, more regional problem. We hope you're enjoying your Sunday morning. Let's get you ready for the rest of the day and the week ahead with your accurate forecast. Welcome back. At the start of the show, you heard the first part of our exclusive interview with the U.S. Attorney for Iowa's Southern District, David Waterman. Now our conversation continues as we ask him about crime in our region affecting us right here at home and how he defines success in his role. I imagine, and probably in part because of how we report crimes and which crimes we choose to report, at least in the media, folks probably think about these crimes as being one-offs or maybe part of something smaller, local, but it really has a wide reach, doesn't it?
It does. It has a much wider reach than I think most realize, and that's in part due to the fact of our location. We are located along I-80 and I-35, and so as a result of that location, we have a lot of, for example, drug trafficking coming across from Illinois, Chicago into eastern Iowa and Des Moines, but also on the western part of the state in Council Bluffs, which is the western division of our office. We have Omaha, Nebraska, which is also, there's some issues with drug trafficking and violence coming from that side of the state as well. So it's really not one-offs, and what's unique about our office is we do a lot of work not only with our federal agencies, which include FBI, DEA, ATF, ICE, HSI, but also our state and local agencies as well. And we do a lot of direct adoption cases. So if there's a federal interest, if there's a federal reason for us to bring a case, then we will also prosecute cases based on local and state law enforcement priorities as well.
I imagine a lot of these cases were already in the works before you took this position. Now that you're 4 months in, right, have you looked and said, here is where we have not been as aggressive as we needed to be?
Great question. And I think I wish I could take credit for everything that's happened, but you're exactly right. A lot of these cases were charged and investigated before I came to the role. I was sworn in on October 15th of last year by Chief Judge Rose, so I've been in the role approximately 5-6 months. And through that process, I have highlighted some things that we've done and tried to implement changes to in the office in terms of managerial changes, indictment review process. But you know, I think I'm trying to build upon the successes of this office, and I think we've done that, and we will continue to do that. One area that the department is focusing on is the national fraud and the issues that have existed, some of which we discussed earlier that had arisen out of Minnesota. That's going to be an area that's going to continue to be a focus. Colin McDonald was just sworn in this week by President Vance into the chief role at Maine Justice, focusing on certain national fraud and issues involving pandemic fraud. So COVID-19 continues to be an issue with those who had abused and took advantage of those federal programs to get funding illegally. And we continue to investigate those individuals as well.
So let's bring that into the conversation here. I don't know how many Iowans necessarily compare themselves and their community to Minnesota, but they're seeing what's happening in Minnesota, whether it's on the fraud front or just generally immigration. And I'm wondering how much do you look at that and say, okay, this influences what we need to be thinking about here, so we're not kind of in that similar position?
I believe there's distinctions between Minnesota and the Southern District of Iowa, and I'll discuss a few. But before doing so, I think it's always important to note, as I said before, I can't discuss specific cases on our docket related to immigration matters or ongoing investigations, whether or not there's going to be an increase, for example, in investigations pertaining to immigration in the Southern District of Iowa. That said, what we benefit from and what I can say is that we have relationships with our federal, state, and local law enforcement that is unique. We're very collaborative. There's a much better coordination amongst those agencies. And if state and local law enforcement don't abide by federal detainers, for example, in immigration-related cases, then they can risk losing funding. And so there's laws in Iowa that assist in ensuring that there is a working relationship among local, state, and federal law enforcement officers. And I think that's why we're not going to have those similar experiences that took place in Minnesota.
I imagine when folks think about the DOJ, they are going to use the big headlines and form their opinions based on that, which is really probably a minority of what the federal office is doing. You made a comment, I think it was when you were being sworn in, about doing the right things the right way for the right reasons. How does that translate to what people should expect from you?
I appreciate that you read my investiture speech.
Sure.
So thank you. And yes, that's perhaps a trite statement, but one that I routinely go back to and just used yesterday during a conversation with our team. doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. Those are principles and traditions that have existed at the Department of Justice that continue on. And although, again, I was nominated by 2 different presidents from different political parties, I think that underscores something important, and that is that I am not a politician. This is not a political role. My key concern and the impetus behind my actions is to pursue truth and justice, to advocate on behalf of victims, and to wear the white hat, to stand up in court and say, David Waterman on behalf of the United States. This has always been a dream of mine to pursue this role, and I think that you look, although priorities may change from one administration to the next, what doesn't change is the mission. The mission is, and you can look this up on the DOJ's website, but it continues to be to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. And that will be the mission of the Department of Justice, regardless of the administration. And we will continue to focus on protecting our communities, advocating and supporting victims, and pursuing truth and justice.
In your position, you don't always know how long the road ahead of you is. How do you define success on a week-to-week basis, month-to-month basis, and then perhaps beyond that?
You are correct that this is a presidentially appointed, Senate-confirmed position. I was grateful again to have been nominated by 2 different presidents, and hopefully that support by the bipartisan support I received indicates that the experiences I had were applicable to the role that I'm currently in, and that I've got the support and confidence of the legislatures to pursue this role. As to success and the goals of the office, my key goals in this role are ensuring that we attract, retain, and develop the best federal prosecutors and trial attorneys in the country. And how do we do that? I think we do that by fostering an environment that is professional, that supports excellence. I also want to, and again, just the question of success, enhance the relationships with our third-party stakeholders. So that includes not only the judiciary, but probation office, the marshal's office, the clerk's office, working alongside our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, the defense bar. And so what I'm doing is I'm routinely meeting with those individuals to ensure that we are most effectively pursuing justice and using our resources in the most effective manner. And finally, one of the other goals that I have, and I think is also will be indicative of success of the office, is the setup of the office. So in terms of the management and the leadership structure, I have made some changes recently, and I think that has improved our communications, and also by decentralizing leadership across the district, by having 2 deputy chiefs, for example, in Des Moines, a criminal chief here in Davenport, a branch chief in Council Bluffs. We can have a diversity of ideas and then ensure that there's consistency across when it comes to charging decisions, our stances during litigation, and then also our positions at sentencing. So when individuals who are charged with similar crimes, they should be getting similar sentences if they have similar criminal histories and similar mitigating factors. The bottom line is to pursue justice, and I think the changes we're making, we're going to see success on that end. It's not only data. Data demonstrates, as I mentioned earlier, some of the key successes we've had in those 3 areas, and including prosecutions of drug overdoses, human trafficking, and violent crime like RICO litigation. But numbers aren't it. If there's a case that the jury decides that acquittal is the correct conclusion to be made based on the facts and the law, then that's justice. And so it's not only based on statistics. We're pursuing cases based on the facts and the law, and I know that was a long-winded answer, but I hope it answered your question.
No, it made total sense. David, thanks so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. We'll wrap up the program. When we come back, stay with us. Right now, Galesburg Group is preparing for a delegation to Washington, D.C. this week. They're going there looking for money. Maddie Fran shows us the projects they want to fund and how the process works.
Less than a block from Galesburg's Amtrak station, the South Street underpass sees a lot of traffic, both below and above. but it's not much of a looker.
Pretty rough shape, huh?
Ken Springer is president of the Knox County Area Partnership.
We provide economic development services to Galesburg, Knox County, and the wider Western Illinois region.
He has an idea to get this underpass into tip-top shape.
This is our second time going out to Washington, D.C.
Next week, he's leading a delegation to advocate for infrastructure funding for 3 main projects.
It's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of walking. There's not a lot of time to see the sites. You're essentially shuffling from one federal building to another. You're going through a lot of security lines.
Springer plans to go every year, so lawmakers and federal agencies keep Galesburg top of mind.
You know, if you can successfully get one project funded, it more than covers the expense of going out to Washington and meeting with these folks.
If the government denies the $1.7 million to plan for a new underpass, it has other options.
The second project is seeking funding for the drilling of additional water wells to serve the community.
Galesburg's aquifer has slightly more PFAS than allowed by the Illinois EPA. $3.7 million for new wells will dilute the concentration to a safe level.
And the third project is funds for a fleet maintenance facility that will help the city of Galesburg out.
The current facility only serves transit vehicles. $3.4 million for a larger facility will let the city maintain big equipment like fire trucks in-house.
And so ultimately, I think everybody wins, and that's why we're doing it.
Springer and his group won't get everything in one go, but when it comes to federal funding, it never hurts to go straight to the top. In Galesburg, Maddie Franz, WQAD News 8.
And that'll do it for News 8 this week. Thanks for watching this morning. Have a restful Sunday, everyone.